Good evening, folks. Tonight we're going to talk about a few things. Actually, some March Madness, high school style in Division 1. You see, 20 years ago, or a little over 20 years ago, when I was in school, we played some pretty daggone good teams. And some of these good teams were actually pretty daggone good. I mean, some of them played to their strongest potential, and they literally played up to where you wouldn't have guessed they could actually go. Some upsets, some big time wins, others you never would have guessed they could have made it that far. Now, I got 2001 right here. I got a bracket here that shows the Sweet 16 and the state champion in Division 1 in high school. And then I have the other brackets here in Division 1 of 2001 about where they all lined up at. Starting in the Cleveland region. Now, we're going to make this quick and easy. Now, in the Bear Arrow District, you have Cleveland John Marshall taking on Parma Normandy. Now, some of these are kind of hard to read, so I apologize. Looks like, I think that's a 6, yeah. Cleveland John Marshall pulls out a big W, winning 68-40. Good win. Then they take on Solon. Solon waits the winner of them, and Solon comes away with the W, winning 75-47. Then Parma takes on Cleveland Lincoln West. Parma comes away with a W. That is 56-55. A 1-point win. Lucky for them. And then number 5, 5th ranked in the state, Cleveland St. Ignatius took on Parma, winning 85-48. Big stomping there. Ouch, I can only imagine what that win was like. Then Cleveland St. Ignatius took on Solon, winning 62-48. We go further south. Berea took on Mid-Park. Berea advanced, winning 45-37. Then Valley Forge took on Cleveland Rhodes, winning 69-63. North Royalton ended up beating Valley Forge 75-57. Then Bedford ended up getting the W over North Royalton 63-49. And St. Ignatius ended up getting the win over Bedford 64-49. So far, no upsets, doesn't seem like. Then Medina beat Westlake, and then at the bottom of that bracket, you got the Grafton District. And these games are played at University of Toledo, except that the Bay Area was played at Cleveland State University. And the other side was played at Toledo University. We'll get to them first. Medina took on Westlake, and Medina ended up winning 48-35. They took on Strongsville. Strongsville ended up winning, as they ended up winning 48-35. Excuse me, I might have said that twice. I apologize for that. The Strongsville advanced past Medina, winning 58-48. The bottom part of that, we have Lorraine Southview end up taking on Elyria, winning 55-48. Then Brunswick ends up beating Lorraine Southview, winning 57-43. Then Lakewood takes on the bottom part of the Grafton District. You have Lakewood taking on Cloverleaf. Cloverleaf falls to Lakewood 63-50. Then Lakewood takes on Admiral King, and Lorraine Admiral King, And they end up beating Lorraine Admiral King 48-41. Amherst Steel takes on North Olmsted, and they beat North Olmsted 52-40. Then Lakewood St. Edward ends up beating Amherst Steel 70-53. And then Lakewood St. Edward end up beating, also known as St. Ed's, everyone calls them. They even did that back in my days. They beat them, ended up beating them 65-55. Then Strongsville ends up beating Lakewood St. Edward 49-47. Now, I apologize in advance when I read the Sweet 16 from here on out, because I may have to say the same scores again when I read from right here, because they may be on here again. And then you'll go to the Toledo University for the title game. Now, over here on the far right, we have Mansfield-Madison taking on Fremont-Ross. Fremont-Ross comes away with the W, winning 65-58. Taking on number 3 in the state, Mansfield. And the first upset of the whole tournament. Mansfield falls to Fremont-Ross in overtime, 52-49. Then Tiffin-Columbiana taking on Sandusky. Sandusky comes away with the W, 68-58. Then Ashland taking on Sandusky. Ashland comes away with the W, winning 51-49. Then Ashland ends up beating Fremont-Ross, winning 59-53. Then Toledo, number 6 in the state, Toledo St. John's, ends up beating Toledo Central Catholic, 89-45. Then Sylvania Southview ends up beating Toledo Woodward, 67-55. Then St. John's ends up beating them, 64-45. Then Sylvania Northview upsets Toledo Libby, the number 7 Toledo Libby, winning 70-64. Then Toledo St. Francis de Sales ends up taking on, very famous name up there, takes on Toledo Whitmer, but falls to Toledo Whitmer, 54-53. Very good game. Then Sylvania Northview ends up beating Toledo Whitmer, 69-56. But then Toledo St. John's ends up taking them out, winning 69-49. Then Asheville takes them out, winning 69-55. Then the bottom part of the bracket, you have Perrysburg taking on Findlay. Perrysburg wins 56-54. Then they end up beating Lima Senior, winning 70. And Lima Senior ends up beating Perrysburg 74-68. Then Wapakoneta ends up falling to Bowling Green 51-46. Then Salina. Then Bowling Green's next victim is Salina, 57-52. Then Lima Senior stomps Bowling Green, making them look small like nothing, 113-35. I don't know what happened there. Then Oregon Clay takes on Toledo Rogers. Toledo Rogers destroys Oregon Clay, 61-45. Anthony Wayne destroys Toledo Waite, 54-41. Mommy beats Toledo Boucher, 66-53. Then number 17, Toledo Scott beats out Toledo Start, 64-56. Then Toledo Scott beats out Mommy, 39-37. Really tight game that one was. Anthony Wayne knocks out Toledo Rogers, 59-52. And Toledo Scott barely gets past Anthony Wayne, 39-33. What's with all these really low-scoring games? Then Lima Senior upsets Toledo Scott. Number 17, Toledo Scott, 55-52. And Cleveland St. Ignatius ends up beating them. Actually, they end up playing Ashland, and Lima Senior ends up beating Ashland 57, 67, 56, and then they end up playing Cleveland St. Ignatius, and St. Ignatius ends up coming away with the win 71-57. On the back of the bracket, you have the Akron region. This was played at the University of Akron. You have East Cleveland Shaw taking on Painesville Riverside. Painesville Riverside wins 86-78, taking on Geneva. Riverside wins 45-34. Then number 12 Mentor ends up being North Lake 87-54. Willoughby South taking on number 12 Mentor, and what a trouncing there, 91-50 over Willoughby South. Then Riverside ends up getting demolished by Mentor, number 12 Mentor, 80-65. Then Madison taking on Chardon. Madison wins 69-54. Then Cleveland Glenville ends up winning 62-40. Cleveland Collinwood ends up beating Cleveland South 62-60. Cleveland Collinwood ends up beating Mayfield 61-46. And Cleveland Glenville continues their command by beating Cleveland Collinwood 70-43. But then it took overtime for Mentor to beat Cleveland Glenville, winning 83-82 in overtime. That was in the districts there. Then they're on to regionals. Now Cuyahoga Falls ends up playing. That was the Euclid district there. Now we're in the Copley district. Then you have Cuyahoga Falls taking on Akron. Firestone ends up advancing, winning 60-49. Taking on number 10, Akron Central Howard. Akron Central Howard ends up winning 72-64. Then Stow ends up taking on Kent Roosevelt. Stow wins 63-46, taking on Wadsworth. And Stow beats Wadsworth 61-51. Then Stow upsets Central Howard 71-47. On the bottom part of that bracket, Macedonia Nordania versus Brecksville. Brecksville advances, winning 52-44. And they continue their attacks by beating out Barberton, winning 65-35. Then Akron Garfield falls in overtime to Akron Ellett, 60-56 in overtime. And then Houston defeats Akron Ellett 62-40. Then Brecksville ends up beating Houston 46-44. Then Stow ends up beating Brecksville 63-44. Then Stow upsets number 12 Mentor 71-70. What a game that is. Now we go to the Canton District, where Green defeats North Canton Hoover 44-40. Then number 16 Massillon Jackson beats out Green 36-21. Then we have Canton Glen Oak taking on Youngstown Boardman. Youngstown Boardman wins 54-51. Youngstown Boardman keeps their game going when they take on Canton McKinley, one of the best programs there is in the state of Ohio that have played forever. And they end up beating Canton McKinley 52-49. And then, excuse me, I catch my breath there. Then Massillon Jackson ends up beating Youngstown Boardman 38-33. And they advance. Canton Timken taking on Uniontown Lake. Uniontown Lake advances, winning 54-47. to take on the fourth ranked team in the state, Massillon Perry, and upsets Massillon Perry in double overtime, 39-38. Then Massillon Washington took on Worcester. Massillon Washington ended up winning 59-55 to advance to play to Austintown Fitch, that is, Fitch. Massillon Washington ends up winning 56-46. Then they ended up taking on Uniontown Lake, and Uniontown Lake advances, winning 49-40 to take on Massillon Jackson. Massillon Jackson ends up winning 69-26. Ouch. Then Warren Holland takes on Cleveland JFK. Cleveland JFK wins in overtime, 62-58, taking on Euclid. This is in the Cleveland district. Then Euclid ends up beating Cleveland JFK 74-55. Then Cleveland Heights takes on Cleveland John Hay, winning 89-48. And they end up upsetting Warren Harding, the 13th ranked team in the state, 69-60. Then Cleveland Heights ends up beating Euclid 64-56. Some good games here. Then Cleveland East ends up playing Garfield Heights, and Garfield Heights came away with only a 4-point win over Cleveland East, 74-70. Maple Heights took on Cleveland East Tech, and Cleveland East Tech took home the win, winning 74-54. And then Lyndhurst Brunch is who they end up taking on. Lyndhurst Brunch end up winning 63-55, taking on Shaker Heights after the win over Garfield Heights, 73-55. Then Shaker Heights advances, winning 54-47. Then Cleveland Heights gets past them, 75-64. And then Massillon Jackson gets past them, winning 66-47. And then Massillon Jackson gets past Stow, winning 45-32. Those two teams, Cleveland St. Ignatius and Massillon Jackson, will meet up. And then here we are in Division 1. And the South. We have Cincinnati Elder taking on Oxford Talawanda. Cincinnati Elder ended up winning that one, 73-41. Cincinnati Sycamore ended up beating Alameda, 58-36. Cincinnati Oak Hills ends up falling to Cincinnati Coleraine, 64-38. Cincinnati Mount Healthy ends up beating Cincinnati Taft in overtime, 63-60. Then Cincinnati Elder ends up beating Cincinnati Sycamore, 58-27. Cincinnati Coleraine ends up beating Cincinnati Mount Healthy, 61-50. And then Cincinnati Elder ends up beating Cincinnati Coleraine, 60-35. Then Hamilton ends up beating Cincinnati LaSalle, 69-57. This is in the Dayton District 1. And Cincinnati Anderson ends up beating Cincinnati Hughes, 61-58. Milford ends up destroying Cincinnati Northwest, 77-27. Then Cincinnati Moeller, the 11th ranked team in the state, ends up beating Milford, 75-52. And then Milford keeps it going with the win in overtime by a score of 61-60. But then their luck runs out as Cincinnati Elder upsets Moeller, 55-40. Then the bottom part of that bracket in Dayton District 2, Springfield South beats out Dayton Belmont, 87-49. And then they take on Dayton Meadowdale, and they destroy Dayton Meadowdale, 92-57. Greenville takes on Lebanon. Greenville beats out Lebanon, 66-48. Then Lebanon advances to take on Tecumseh, and Lebanon wins 77-38. And then Then Springfield South beats them out, winning 79-47. Then down to the bottom, very far bottom of that, Clayton Northmont takes on Dayton Stebbins, 75-50. Then Miamisburg takes on Huber Heights Wayne. Miamisburg comes away with the W, winning 71-58. Centerville taking on West Carrollton. Centerville wins it, 64-50. Then they advance to take on Kettering Fairmont. They end up beating Kettering Fairmont, 47-38. Then Clayton Northmont ends up beating them, 48-43. Then Springfield South ends up beating Clayton Northmont, 51-41. Then Cincinnati Elder sneaks past Springfield South by a point, 47-46, to get to the title game, to get to the district regional championship. Then on the other side of the bracket, you have Vandalia Butler take on Springfield North. Vandalia Butler advances, winning 59-50, winning Mason. Then they get past Mason, 49-41. Then Sydney takes on Piqua. Piqua advances, winning 52-47. Then you have Troy winning on them. Troy wins 66-47. Then Vandalia Butler ends up beating them in overtime, 67-61. Then you have, since this is in Dayton District 3, then Cincinnati Walnut Hills takes on Lakota West. A 56-46 winner, Lakota West that is. Cincinnati Withrow ends up beating Cincinnati Aiken, 50-41. Cincinnati Glen Estate ends up falling to Loveland, 75-46. The number 8, Cincinnati St. Xavier, ends up beating Loveland, 64-58 in overtime. Then St. Xavier continues their dominance after Withrow defeats Lakota West with a 55-53 win. And then St. Xavier ends up beating Withrow 59-43. And then Vandalia Butler ends up beating St. Xavier in overtime, 64-54. So now we go to the bottom part of the bracket in the district, in Dayton District 4. Cincinnati Princeton ends up beating Cincinnati Woodward, winning 72-61. The number 2, Cincinnati Winton Woods, ends up beating Cincinnati Princeton, 77-53. Fairfield ends up beating Cincinnati, taking on Cincinnati Hills, Western Hills, and Western Hills wins 70-44. Then Lakota East takes on Harrison. Lakota East advances, winning 56-52. And then Wilmington advances past Dayton Carroll, winning 58-47. Beaver Creek gets past Dayton Patterson, 56-44. Middletown gets past Fairborn, 74-47. Then they get past Xenia, Middletown gets past Xenia, 67-51. Then Beaver Creek gets past Wilmington, 44-31. Excuse me, I might have said that already, but I'm just so much into this. Then Beaver Creek gets past Middletown in double overtime, 60-52. And Cincinnati Western Hills upsets Cincinnati Winton Woods, 67-58. But I forgot a few over here. Okay. Lakota East beats out Harrison, 56-52. Then Cincinnati Western Hills ends up beating Lakota East, 93-62, and that's where Cincinnati Western Hills ends up upsetting Cincinnati Winton Woods. Then Vandalia Butler ends up falling to Cincinnati Western Hills, 55-34. And then in overtime, Cincinnati Elder advances, winning 57-57. And then we get this down over here. Some pretty daggone good teams we have here. In the Columbus region. At the Fairgrounds Coliseum, all the games are played. Westerville North versus Lancaster. Next, we'll go on the bottom part over here in the Columbus District 1. Next, we'll do the Southeast here. Logan versus Actually, correction, we'll do Columbus District 1. Columbus West, we'll do Mount Vernon. Westland takes on Whetstone. An 86-50 Westland victory. Then they take on Mount Vernon. Westland wins there. 68-52. Thomas Worthington takes on Franklin Heights. Thomas Worthington, your winner. 68-51. Then we go to the bottom part of the bracket. Columbus West wins. Actually, Thomas Worthington beats out Westland. 55-33. Then Columbus West ends up being Grove City, 50-38. Then Hilliard-Davidson taking on Pickerington. It's an interesting one. Hilliard-Davidson Pickerington ends up beating Hilliard-Davidson, 56-53. After Pickerington's win over Hilliard-Davidson there. Then Reynoldsburg ends up beating Columbus West 79-49. And then an upset win. Then Reynoldsburg beats out Pickerington 45-44. And then Thomas Worthington ends up winning in overtime against Reynoldsburg 51-44. Setting up the showdown with number 1 to the north here. We'll talk about that here momentarily. It's Columbus Briggs takes on Columbus Brookhaven, number 1 Brookhaven, a 109-51 game. Then Columbus South takes on Brookhaven, a 91-52 game. Then it's Westville South taking on Walnut Ridge, a 68-55 Westville South win. Then Delaware Hayes taking on Westville South, a 56-48 win. Then Brookhaven beats out Westville South, a 68-56 winner. When we go further north, this is a District 2 battle here. Independence takes on Worthington Kilbourne, an 80-45 winner for Independence. Olentangy taking on Upper Arlington. Upper Arlington, an 80-52 winner over Olentangy. Then Dublin Scioto ends up beating Upper Arlington in overtime, 46-44. Then Dublin Scioto ends up beating Independence, 64-57. But then Brookhaven, who took on Dublin Scioto, ends up winning 54-40. And then we come down to Thomas Worthington and Columbus Brookhaven, a 64-50 win. And then on the bottom part of the bracket over here, you have Logan taking on Chillicothe, a 68-54 win for Chillicothe. And then Marietta ends up beating Athens, 55-38. The number 9 East and number 15 Zanesville ends up beating New Philadelphia, 58-46. And number 15 Zanesville ends up upsetting number 9 East Liverpool, 65-52. Then Zanesville ends up beating Logan. Next, we'll go to the other part here. Logan ends up beating Chillicothe, 68-54. Marietta beats Athens, 55-38. Then Logan beats Marietta, 58-49. Then a 61-43 win for Zanesville to advance to take on Dublin Kaufman. The winner of the Lancaster Dublin Kaufman game. First off, let's start at the bottom, work our way up. Dublin Kaufman ends up taking on Groveport Madison, winning 59. Number 14, Dublin Kaufman, ends up beating Groveport Madison 59-24. Then they end up beating Northland 67-47. Then they take on Marion Harding ends up taking on Marion Franklin. And Marion Franklin ended up winning 71-66. Then Beechcroft ends up beating Marion Franklin 63-59. That led to the Dublin Kaufman and Beechcroft battle, and Dublin Kaufman ended up winning 64-35. And then we go further north where Newark took on Hilliard Darby. Hilliard Darby ended up winning 45-40. Gannett Lincoln took on Hilliard Darby, winning in overtime 48-46. Lancaster then took on Westerville North. Lancaster wins 65-59. Then a very tight battle between Gannett Lincoln and Lancaster. And Lancaster ended up winning 32-29. And lo and behold, Dublin Kaufman, who Lancaster defeated earlier, 58-54, ends up getting beat by Dublin Kaufman, this time 54-43. And Dublin Kaufman advances to take on number 1 Brookhaven, who ends up winning 68-63. Now, we're going to read the records of these teams, so we can actually have some fun with this. Now, I understand I already read these scores maybe once already, but I'll read them again. Number 14, Dublin Kaufman beats Zanesville, who was 19-4 at the time. They finished the season at 19-5. They win 69-57. And then Brookhaven, who beats Thomas Worthington, who are 25 undefeated. Number 1, Columbus Brookhaven is clearly the sound undefeated number 1 team overall. They win 64-50 over Thomas Worthington. They advance to take on Dublin Kaufman in the Elite 8. Then 68-63. Dublin Kaufman falls to Brookhaven. Then we go down south a little bit. Cincinnati Elder take on Springfield. Cincinnati Elder, who ended up beating Springfield South 47-46, advances to take on Vandalia Butler Western Hills, and it was a 55-34 win for Cincinnati Western Hills. Now it's Vandalia Butler. Then a 57-32, and Cincinnati Elder ended up winning 58-57 overtime against Cincinnati Western Hills. St. Ignatius beat Strongsville. Thomas Worthington ended their season at 20-4 after a 64-50 loss to Brookhaven. Springfield South ended the season at 19-6, while Vandalia Butler finished the season at 20-5. While Dublin Kaufman finished the season at 23-3, while Ashland finished the Strongsville finished the season at 20-4. Cincinnati Western Hills finished the season at 21-5 after losing to Cincinnati Elder. Then Ashland finished the season at 19-5 after losing to Lima Senior. Then Cleveland St. Ignatius ended up beating Lima Senior 71-57 and advancing to the Final Four. Mentor ended up getting beat, and they finished the season at 21-4. Actually, they are 21-3. Excuse me. What am I thinking? It was a good season for everyone. 17-6. Cleveland Heights falls. They finished the season at 17-6. Cleveland. Then Massillon Jackson ends up finishing the season at 22-4 after a 61-47 loss to Cleveland St. Ignatius. But the upset of them all, Cincinnati Elder upsets number 1 Brookhaven 68-50. And then Cleveland St. Ignatius ends up beating Cincinnati Elder 49-46 to be your Division I state champion in 2001. I'll be back with more on this tomorrow about 2002, and then we can have a little more open discussion about this then. With that being said, hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications. With that being said, I'm out of here. Peace.